Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth, and opposite of that is mythology. I'll just give you a very interesting story. On one of my Facebook, and I hardly am on Facebook. Sometimes I go there once in a week maybe. And I posted according to biblical mythology, and I got so many hate comments. And then I had to ask them, why do you call native cultures as mythology? And they had no answer. And actually, there is no antonym of mythology in English language. And that's why I coined the term Sattology, because Sanskrit dhatu myth, opposite of that is Sat. And therefore, Sattology, according to etymological reasons, becomes the right word, which is science of truth or study of truth. So, a very, very special guest. I already disclosed his name to you. Secret is already out. And very influential in communicating this message. And he has been doing it publicly for many, many years before me. And he has done the groundwork and people love him so much. Without delay, let us welcome Sri Raj Vedam.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya ji. It's a pleasure to be on your channel again. Thank you.
So I was talking about convictions of Raj Vedam because see, the thing is, you speak very eloquently and you bring out facts, you do your own research and come out with some credible arguments. Now, what led to those arguments? Like, what was your thought process behind coming out so strongly to defend the Vedic culture, Sanatan Dharma?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So I think the answer goes to the roots of the name that you got for this channel, Sattology. So we are, all of us, every single human being on this planet is on a quest. And the quest is to understand reality, truth. What is the truth? So we find that a whole lot of us are divided into various categories depending on how we perceive what we call as truth. So some of us, as somebody comes and tells us that, look, here is a portion that will make you invincible, and you have a choice, right? You can believe that man, that is the truth, and part with, let's say, $100 and buy the portion, or you can say, get away from me, charlatan. You could do that. So it's your choice. And how do you do that? You're doing that on the basis of your analysis of the situation, your analysis of understanding what is going on. Perhaps you're using some instruments. Those instruments could be some evidence-based mechanisms or some facts that you derive or some means of perception that you have or some knowledge that you have. You bring these to bear upon the situation and you make an informed choice and you do whatever you have to do. If your knowledge is not sufficient or you're pretty shallow in your thinking and your methodology, you're gullible. You're going to believe and say, yeah, give it to me. I want to be saved. So give me this miracle potion and I'll drink it and I'll get saved. So these are the kind of things you do. So as far as I'm concerned, all through my growing years, I was exposed to what we can loosely call the Marxist, missionary, frameworks of education and the westernized colonial way of looking at history. And this history saw all of Indian contributions as backward, primitive, stagnant, a recent civilization, all this nonsense, which led me to think, why is it that we have a discrepancy between what we know about our civilization, either through the shared memories that we have, or through the scriptures that we have, or through other stories that are passed on for centuries? Why is there a discrepancy? So that led me to a search for the truth. And in my process of evaluating the truth, I found that much of what is written out there is nonsense being sold under various headings by either Eurocentric people or by missionaries or by the Marxists or by any number of peddlers of disinformation over here. So that is what I find out there. So it is critical and incumbent upon us to evaluate all claims critically, rationally, logically, use these instruments to perceive what we are confronted with as truth and take it forward. So, Aditya ji, that is my answer to you. Similar to Sattology, we are on a search for truth, and we're on a search for truth. What are the mechanisms you're going to use to evaluate what is truth? I think that is the underlying situation question here. That is what has led me to evaluate the claims. That is what has led me to come out with my critiques of some of the popular statements out there, or the claims of the charlatans selling you this miracle drink that will make you saved.
I have two questions actually. One is you use the word missionary, and we
Hmm.
all know mission. There are military missions,
Right,
and so they are on a mission. For what?
right,
You know, what is their
right.
mission?
So this is the Great Commission, right? So these Christians are enjoined upon to go and bear witness. And what is this witness that they claim? The witness they claim is that there was somebody called Jesus Christ who was born of a virgin, and he was a sinless one. And he apparently died on the cross for what is referred to as sins, your sins. And he rose miraculously 3 days later in a resurrection. And if you were to believe in these phenomena, which I'll refer to them euphemistically as phenomena, then you will be saved. And what is the saved is, in the afterlife, you'll be admitted to pleasure-filled heaven. Or if you don't believe that, you'll be condemned to everlasting hellfire forever and ever in purgatory. You'll be suffering and screaming and crying, and no mercy for you. There's no only one way, one life to live. You believe or you die, and that kind of a thing. So these are the claims. So the Christians are enjoined upon to bear witness to these phenomena that are referred to, and you're expected to listen to this, and you're expected to believe in this. And if you do so, then you are saved. Otherwise, you're condemned. So this is what I meant when I talked about the missionaries on the mission. And we find that all through history, these people were at the forefront of trying to propagate Christianity, right from the Roman times itself, when Roman soldiers were empowered to go out there and destroy what they called as pagan libraries, pagan temples, pagan people, killing all the intellectuals in the Greek Empire and the ancient times. Right from that time onwards till the present day, we see the same Talibanic mentality of trying to erase other world cultures for domination and to propagate this ideology which they come about. So this is what I referred to when I said missionaries. And these people were at the forefront of much of the Indian historiography because they came along with the colonialists. Wherever the colonialists were, missionaries were there also. So they were at the forefront of collecting Indian Sanskritic literature, and they obviously had the zeal to learn Sanskrit, and they translated this according to the lens that they preferred, which is a Judeo-Christian lens, and translated all the Puranas, Itihasas, all of our texts, Brahmanas, Upanishads, according to their way of seeing it, because they wanted to propagate a certain view that Indians are backward, primitive, superstitious, and so on. So they refused to see the mechanisms in which knowledge is communicated in the past, but preferred to put it in a form that they could push away as mythology of the primitives and these kinds of things. So this is what I referred to when I said missionaries, Aditya ji. And unfortunately, their writings and their received wisdom has percolated is a wrong word, has strongly influenced our ecosystem even today. It controls the minds of many people, Hindus included, who tend to see the world in the frameworks established by these people.
No, very interesting because, and also you use the word believe, believe. Now you believe in something which may or may not exist because when you use the vritti, then there is something known as nidra vritti, because nidra vritti means kalpanik. In sleeping, you believe in something. Now, if you look at the Hollywood movies, all based on the same Christian thought process, you believe in something. The dead people rise from the graves and walk as zombies. This is a belief, and they
Right.
believe in it. They live in it. The word evil, the word sin, these are all the very core dogmatic beliefs.
Right.
The Vedic culture is exactly opposite of that. Is based on prataksha praman, actually prataksha.
Precisely, yes.
And so how do you contrast the belief based ideologies, and people say that okay, they have earned so much money because they believed in themselves. Well, the even a crazy man believes in themselves. His version of truth is totally different than others, but he believes in it.
Right.
So how much damage this belief culture has made to the human society?
So a lot of questions there. So let me unpack one by one. So you started off with belief. What is this whole notion of belief? Well, like I said, people can come and sell you anything that you believe that this is the formula for happiness in the afterlife. And you could choose to believe in that and suspend your reality. If somebody comes and asks you that, is it possible that humans have parthenogenesis? And you say, I don't know what it says so in the scriptures, parthenogenesis, virgin birth, and all this kind of thing. So you tend to suspend your rational thought, your logical thought, and you believe in things of this nature. And so somebody comes and says that here's a man who went to a cave and an angel came and told him certain things and he had his revelations and so on. And he said, kill all the idolaters. And do you believe in that? Well, you have suspended your belief and you have preferred to say, yes, he did receive a revelation. That's what God wants. So we as human beings have a choice. In our pramanas, like you correctly said, in the Samkhya tradition, for example, Rishi Kapila saying that truth exists whether we human beings know it or not. What a profound statement. It means there is something called truth out there. Whether you're able to perceive it or not is immaterial. The truth exists and the truth is out there. And our goal in life, our quest as seekers, as seers, we are required to go and try to see what that reality is, to experience that reality, to understand our true nature. So this is what the Hindu philosophy has been for all times. So you might have people who say that, look, I am seeing certain thing and therefore I know that is true, perception. But the point is, take a look at me. I'm wearing glasses over here. And why do I wear glasses? Because my vision is obviously impaired. Because my vision is impaired, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. I need to wear glasses to make sure that is right. For example, you go on a road, on a let's say, not a well-lit road, and you see a rope on the road, and you might mistake the rope for a snake, especially if you're in India, where snakes are very common. But then if it's well lit, you'll see, wait a minute, my heart had stopped for a minute. I thought it was a snake or stepping on that. But now I see with a lot of light, it is just a rope. So clearly, the question is, what are you seeing and what are you believing? So when we say perception, you can have perception in two ways, according to Vaisheshika Darshana, right? You could have through the external organs, through the sense objects that you have, where your eyes, your nose, your tongue, your taste, hearing, all these kind of things, you can perceive what you think is the external world and try to make some sense of the phenomena that is presented to you. Or it also looks for the internal understanding, perception, where you go through a process of trying to analyze thoughts rationally, logically, enumerate all the things that you're seeing and examine them rationally and come to the conclusion of what that reality is. This is what Vaisheshika says. In other words, the Vedic systems have got darshanas that are truly scientific, that require us to look at all phenomena in a scientific way. Now look at the way science has progressed. Today we know that, for example, when you look at this picture behind me, you're seeing all kinds of colored books out there. How do we know that the color that I'm seeing is the same as the color that you're seeing? We know that the phenomenon of colors, because the electromagnetic spectrum has got certain waves that are coming out there, impinging your eyes, which means retina, the rods and cones in your eye, and you're getting a sensation of light because electrical impulses from your optic nerve go back to your brain, and your brain constructs an image. And so we are told that because you're seeing a red light, it means that's happening because it has absorbed all lights except red. All wavelengths are absorbed except red, for example, in the red text, and therefore you see it as a red light. So we know that our perception is a construct of our brain, which is what even today quantum mechanics and quantum physics are telling us, that we alter the reality with our observation. This is a very strange way to look at the world, but that apparently is what quantum mechanics is investigating today. So we know that looking for reality out there is perhaps today folded into looking at reality inwards, inside, trying to understand what is going on in the brain. Why does the brain perceive some messages the way it does? What is this reality that I'm constructing? For example, the reality of a rope being mistaken for a snake. For example, for a minute that becomes reality for me. Then I realize that that is not reality. There is something else out there. So Aditya ji, you started talking about belief, believers, and faith, and all of these kind of things. These are euphemisms for brainwashing. These are euphemisms of brainwashing that you should believe. You should be a sheep. You follow the shepherd. The shepherd goes out there, and you're a sheep. Your goal in life is to follow a divine dictated message. You don't question, because questioning means you are giving it to Satan. Satan is at all exit doors. Your mind is locked in. And if there's an exit door somewhere, Satan is waiting out there to more or less tempt you. So these are the kind of notions out there. Or in some other faiths, they say that blasphemy, you cannot question this. If you question it as blasphemy, your head will be chopped off, and these kind of notions. But in sharp contrast to that way of looking at the world, the Sanatan Dharma with the Vedic philosophies ask you to be a seeker, use the darshanas, use rationality, logic, understanding to see the reality of things. And today we know that the wisdom is going back to go inwards. What Vaisheshika talked about, internal perception, external perception. External perception is unreliable. The better way of knowledge building is internal perception through logic. And we understand today with quantum physics and everything, the attention is now focused on the working of the mind. How do we perceive reality? It's gone to that. So there's a deep questions, deep answers to what you asked for, Aditya ji. And as far as the impact on the world because of believers' ideology, clearly we have seen enormous amount of unhappiness, of sadness, of violence, of bigotry, of slavery, of genocides, of wars, of murders. All kinds of things have been unleashed on the world because of this notion of believe. And my God told you must kill all these unbelievers, whether it's from Theodosius, who was the successor of Constantine in Roman Empire. From that point on, Christianity had been on a rampage, killing and wiping off people that didn't believe in their ideology. And since 7th century, Islam has been on a similar quest, trying to wipe out the people who don't believe in their ideology or who their God has commanded that they should go and kill, because these people are an abomination to their God. Therefore, go and kill them. So this kind of horrendous thinking has led to inhumane behaviors. And we are seeing the result of that even today. So unless we humans evolve, we humans need to evolve to question, to understand rationality, logic. We cannot hope to have universal peace and conquer these big problems of humanity and the world's existence itself as we know it because of climate change and other ideologies. We need to take a strong look at the thought systems of the world, the issues of the believers, and try to see the contrast with the Vedic thinking and where the solutions really lie.
See, the multiple gun shootings in North America, we have seen that, and also the nobody has a solution except people who believe in Veda or follow the Vedic text. But nobody else has a solution, and nobody is willing to accept any solution also, because we are not part of their family culture. We are not part of the belief structure. So you and I, even though we are American citizens, but we have no say in whatsoever what goes on. And I hear multiple times CNN and Fox News discussions over there. There is no solution anywhere. And they have reduced human to a chemical. So the brain level, the psychiatric drugs, they help you bring the mood up. Again, coming from the belief structure, belief, same. The problem is much deeper. The malaises in the philosophy itself. And so the way they are creating their next generation, you'll agree me or disagree with me, but the point is, the problem is not like human is not a mechanical machine. And we all know from Veda, vritti plays a very important role. And without vritti, as I'm writing my new book and I'm like really getting deep into that, so where I'm just shocked that the science that we have given of pacifying the vritti or halting the vritti, is not being taught. So no amount of drugs can stop it. No amount of chemical manipulation or genetic manipulation can stop it. Like one of the core philosophy of a GMO crop is that Americans should look bigger than the others, brighter and taller than the others. It's like an animalistic mindset. So do you think that the animalism which the West detests, and they call it animism, they call entire Hindu culture as animism, or people do not know that they actually refer to animism. And so do you think that the belief based ideologies have no solution to the current malaise they are facing, and that's why their society is crumbling?
That's a loaded question there, Aditya. But I'll begin with a correction. You refer to us as US citizens. A correction, I am an Indian citizen. I hold an Indian passport. I am in the US on a permanent resident visa. So that correction said, obviously people will question what my views have got on the US polity or the US way of doing things. But I've been a resident here and paid my taxes for many, many years. So I think I do have an opinion on what is going on out there. So you asked a deep question over there. So one has got to reflect carefully. Now, as far as I'm concerned, as a Hindu, I would ask, what is the dharmic response to some of the problems that you mentioned earlier? You talked about the shootings, very unfortunate school shootings that take place in the US. Unfortunately, much more frequently than any other part of the world. I don't think in any other part of the world we see the evils that we see over here. So I think it's a well-known issue that the availability of guns everywhere, the lack of sufficient controls on how gun sales are done or how guns are regulated at home, kept under lock and key, and these kind of things are responsible. So a lot of bright people are given a lot of solutions for these things, but then somewhere or the other, one will hit these bottlenecks or these barriers. One of the barriers being the Constitution, you have the right to bear arms and have private militias that can challenge unpopular government, for example, that is encoded in the Constitution of the United States itself. So the question would come that how can you regulate gun sales? Well, one can make argument that maybe in the past, when the Constitution was envisioned, there were no automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons, and they had only muskets and maybe single-action, bolt-action rifles and those kind of things. So one might make that argument. And the counter-argument would be, well, how can you restrict anything? If the idea was to challenge an unpopular government, a dictatorial government by the citizenry, then how can the government and soldiers have automatic weapons, whereas the citizenry, private militia is only given single-action, bolt-action rifles? You can't do that. So clearly there are arguments that people make on this side and that side. So it means the solutions are not to be found at this level, but one has got to abstract to higher and higher levels. And you correctly pointed it out. Is there something in the belief system itself? Is there something in the way they look at themselves, in the way they have framed the debate, the way they have framed the parameters of this discussion or this entire constitution and everything? That has got to be questioned. And I believe the answer is to be found there. We have, as Hindus, we follow what we understand of our dharma. Every one of us has got a duty to follow dharma for the rhythm of the universe, and we have a role to play over there. And what is that dharma? It is not easily understood. At any given time, we wear multiple caps. I'm wearing a cap as a speaker now, or as a parent, or as a husband, a spouse, or as a citizen of India, or as a resident of United States. There's so many caps that we wear at any given time, and we have a dharma to each of those caps that we are wearing. And we need to ask, what is the right thing I must do when I'm wearing this cap, on this cap, on this cap? So every cap that we wear, we had to question what is the right thing to do. So I think the people who run the country, the people who make the laws, they need to wear these multiple caps and see this not in ideologically aligned positions, but try to ask what is the right thing to do for this nation and for the world as a whole. And so they need to ask the questions. For example, is an 18-year-old old enough and mature enough to buy weapons? Well, we cannot have one statement fits all, because we have very, very mature and intelligent and rational, logical, compassionate 18-year-olds, and we have enormously immature 18-year-olds. So where is the cutoff? That is where mathematics comes, and you say statistically, psychologically, these are the things you say, blah, 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 hand wave and say 18 years, 19 years, 21 years cutoff. But I don't think that will solve the problem, because all you need is one counterexample and you have violence happening again. Then the question comes, do we continue to have a need for guns on the roads? Again, like I said, that's a different kind of question over there. So bottom line, I think need to question the very basis on which we have framed our thought processes. If certain kind of thinkings came because we are believers in a certain ideology, we need to unpack that. We need to unpack that and see, is there a better way of seeing reality that is at a higher level of abstraction than believe and this shall be done. These are the axioms, and we will not question these axioms. You must try and see, is there a way that we can go past that and frame the discussion a different way. So Aditya ji, you asked a question, are these problems that we are seeing because of belief systems? I believe the answer is yes. A belief that, for example, God created the world for man to enjoy, and everything at his disposal has led to the rape of the world's resources. And we are seeing that. So every time there are climate scientists who come and say that man's activity is leading to a warming of the global temperatures, there are people who come and say, no, 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 I don't think that is it. It's a natural processes and this happened in the past. It will continue to happen, and those kind of things. So we are seeing a pushback, and some of that pushback has come from unbridled capitalism. And that capitalism, again, based on certain ideas over here that go back to the belief systems, that is why it has come. So there's no morality over there. So somebody who's espousing capitalism now needs to wear multiple caps and see logically, rationally, is the rape of the earth leading to certain problems that we see today, the overpopulations that we see, the overcrowding, the appearance of new diseases every day from China, literally, these kind of things, or a global activity, industrial activity, and burning of fossil fuels, is that giving rise to climate change and those kinds of things. So I think if people were mature enough to wear these hats and ask the dharmic questions, are we doing the right thing? I think that introspection itself will lead people on a path to find the solutions. That introspection means you must set aside your beliefs and you must try to ask what is the right thing to do. The minute you're on such a quest, you're a dharmic person. You're trying to find what is the natural rhythm of the universe, and you're trying to fit in the best way that you can in doing that. So Aditya ji, yes, I believe that when people adopt more of a Vedic thought system and ideology approach to the issues, solutions will be found more readily than they can be found in belief-based ideological chains that people tie around themselves and are unable to overcome them.
Yeah, thank you so much for that detailed reply on that one. The we are all talking about solutions here, and you correctly said, unless there is a Vedic thought process, the solutions cannot be found, because most of the other philosophy, Abrahamic philosophy, is based on feeling, and there is no science over there. Even belief is kind of a mental imagination.
Right.
In Sanskrit we call it nidra vritti. It's a nidra vritti, and somehow that is also accentuating that people go to and more Americans are looking for answers right now, and what is wrong with the society. So one of the problem comes to the exceptionalism, that we are here to civilize, we are here to give lectures. So that's why you'll see all the American State Department does is judges, you are right, you are wrong, you are right, you are wrong. And somehow suddenly the world has changed so much in 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 months or 4 months now, that everyone is questioning USA right now, and they are questioning that whether you are right or wrong, or whether your democracy is right or wrong, because people do not know. And there is one, Prabhupada actually said it, democracy means demon crazy, and he said it, and he was attacked for that also, but nobody could attack him because he's an acharya, so everyone kept quiet. But he's the first one to say democracy means demon crazy. And one of the US presidents said that friendship with us is American friendship is bad. Sorry, American enemy is bad, but a friendship with America is fatal. Okay, he said it, and so the we are looking at demonizing everything else and giving lecture to everybody else how they should be right, and that is so ingrained. The exception is so ingrained that you cannot question. They believe, they're completely convinced that there is no other country which has been greater than USA. I mean, I love national pride being there, but what about Native Americans? What happened to their land? They're the people of the land. So do you think that this concept of Native Americans being the original inhabitants of this land ever come into the psyche of the policymakers sitting in DC? And I would like, thank you for correcting me on the citizenship thing. I'm an American citizen, but he's a Indian citizen. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think it's a great question, Adityaji. So once again, I will abstract this to the bigger historical situation over here. So this whole notion from the Judaic notion that there is a chosen people, that God is a chosen people who will be admitted to heaven, the Israelites, and from there on leading to the exclusivity claims of Jesus Christ, and to be saved is to believe in him, that led to certain ideologies in the world. But historically, even Christianity has looked to the Old Testament for inspiration, for a historical sense, and so on. In that historical sense of the prophetic tradition that is there in the Old Testament, we have the story of Noah. Everybody knows about Noah's Ark, and how apparently a great flood happened, and the world was populated by Noah and all the animals he took on the ark. This is the story, the biblical story out there. And we are also told that the world is populated with Noah's progeny, right? Noah had three sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. And Japheth, I believe, was the originator of the white races. And Shem was the originator of the Semitic races. And Ham was a cursed son. He was cursed by his father Noah because of some of the transgression and their myths and so on. Anyway, he was cursed, and he was required to serve the progeny of the other son. And Noah's descendants, sorry, Ham's descendants are all the colored races, the black people, and so on. So this is the racial theory which the white people believed for a very, very long time. And it is this kind of toxic mix of Christianity being superior to everything else, and the world must be Christianized, otherwise it's a problem, and everybody's got to go and believe in Christianity, otherwise second coming of Christ will not happen. All these nonsensical notions, along with this idea of racial theory, which people believed, the anthropologists and others believed in a certain time frame. So these led to what Kipling has referred to as white man's burden. This notion that the white man is superior. Remember, when they came to India, it was the same playbook. They wanted to show Indians a backward, primitive, superstitious, and stagnant society, whereas the white Europeans are progressive and they are intelligent and they can have technology and know better truths and these kind of progressives and such things. So this is the same playbook they applied everywhere. So what you're seeing in United States today with the notion of exceptionalism is a construct. It's a construct for rallying the people together under this notion of exceptionalism that transcends, because USA today is a heterogeneous society, right? It's got the white people, black people, the Mexican, the Latina people, and Asians, and so many other people, including the Native Americans. So you need a better way to put everybody together, and they have all united with the military, exceptionalism, sports, and all these kind of things. So, but the roots of all of these things are again hidden over here in this racial theory. So this racial theory has been demolished very comprehensively with our knowledge of genetics. In genetics, we have no notion that there are three groups of people in the world from Noah's sons. Such a thing does not exist. Neither do we see a clustering of mutations or haplogroups and other things in genetics that will say that, yeah, you're what we call Caucasian. Yeah, you're what we call the black races. No such thing exists at the genetic level. So these are constructs. These are constructs that people are taking by the phenotypes and others, the appearance and such things, and they have no basis. However, it has been the basis of bigotry It's been the basis of bigotry because of the belief systems coming from Noah's Ark and all this nonsense. This was the basis for slavery. Whenever slavery was attempted to be justified, they would say that, look, in the Old Testament, it says that these black people are meant to be enslaved and so on. And the Arabs, who were the forefront of the slave trade, they also wholeheartedly believe this nonsense because even their ideology stems from the Judaic ideology to a great extent. The prophetic tradition is the same, and so on. So, anyway, what we see is that even this notion of mixing of what they call as races for marriages, even that was forbidden because then how do you maintain racial purity according to the Old Testament? That is what the Portuguese saw, for example, in the new occupations in North and South America, where they saw that the white people, settlers, were mixing with the natives, mixing with the slaves that are taken from Africa, and these mixed races are coming about, and they're all befuddled. What do we make of these? Are these white people? Are they black people? Are they mixed races? So this whole notion of casta came about to maintain this bloodline purity. This bloodline purity that will ensure that what they know in biblical tradition continues to be true. So I think whether it's a notion of American exceptionalism, or whether it's a notion of white man's burden, or whether it's a notion of talking down to others, we see in the historical tradition that a phenomena does not exist today in the Western mind unless it is recognized or validated by a white person. If a white person, and today it might slightly be changed to a Western person, perhaps from a Western university, Harvard or elsewhere, takes notice of a phenomena, only then it exists. Even if some wisdom has been in a tribal society in Africa, let us say, for many generations, it does not exist. It is not true unless validated by a Westerner. So this kind of arrogance we see all the time in the West, that they know things better than anybody else. They can see things better than anybody else. They can do things better than anybody else. The facts are that when this whole notion of scientific revolution came about, after the Renaissance, that came when the church was challenged, the so-called Reformation of Martin Luther and others, that challenged the orthodoxy. The orthodoxy had control over the people's minds from Constantine Christianity, 330 current era, all the way to 1500s. That's why we say that Europe was a hellhole, a dark ages for them, literally with disease, poverty, illiteracy, and all those things. Whereas Asia was happily, merrily making all kinds of discoveries. We had Aryabhatta at that time, Varamihira, we had Brahmagupta, we had Bhaskara 1, Bhaskara 2, and so many other greats making great advances because their minds were not curtailed the way the Western mind is curtailed. So it required Martin Luther to challenge the orthodoxy. It required the same fortitiously. At that time, Indian knowledge has been taken by the Arabs and injected into Spain, and from Spain it was translated into Latin. And suddenly in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, Western Europe was awakening to knowledge from India. It was awakening to knowledge from their own Greek past, where Greeks had adopted Indian darshana or Vaisheshika, which we can see in Socrates' work, in Plato's works, and so on. So they became aware of perception, inference, rationality, logic, and they proclaimed to themselves a self-exaltation, if you will, that they had a scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution was nothing more than awakening to the fact that truth is to be found outside of claims, which you're required to believe. You go outside that and you see truth for what it is by adopting rationality, logic, evidence-based looking at facts, and you find a new reality. So we know that in the history of the world, Western Europe or the white people were the last people to be civilized. They were uncivilized for the longest time, and they got civilized perhaps from around 1500. Well, I use that word civilized in a loose sense, but from about 1500s, 1600s onwards, when they could see perception, reality, and so on. Fortuitously for them at that time, through the money that was leached from the colonies, which they had from Americas all the way to Africa, all the way to India and other parts of Asia. Money was being sucked out and was being applied in Europe. And at that time, also we find that the so-called industrial revolution that came about, starting with United Great Britain at that time, it was financed by the taxes and the loot from the colonies. The raw material was taken sourced from the colonies. Labor was taken from slave labor, indentured labor, and so on. The markets for them were these captive markets in the colonies. And that is how Europe enriched itself between 1600, 1700, 1800s, 1900s, and up to the 20th, 21st centuries. The same story all over. It was done by enforcing that the rest of the world, which means the colonies and others, do not have access to technology. Technology was denied to Indians. Indians were denied participation in the Industrial Revolution. Whenever some Indian businessman would propose starting some industry, that was shot down and killed by the British. And Indian shipbuilding industry, which is one of the most powerful one in the world, that was destroyed by the British. So we have so many instances of what happened and transpired, so that in today's world, we are seeing that the Western Europe is one of the richest societies out there compared to the rest of the world. It was by this accumulation of loot and by accumulation of and by illegal trade practices, unfair rather trade practices, that sponged off money from rest of the world into Europe. We see that today. So the gestation time that they have had with the new way of looking at mathematics, the new way of looking at sciences, have started from the 15th, 16th centuries onwards, and they've had a monopoly on that for this much of time. So any claimed superiority has to be seen in this historical sense. But when the field has been made level playing field, we now see Indian intellectuals who are there everywhere in some of the top universities in the world and making great advances in technology, making great advances in sciences everywhere. And not just Indians, you're seeing Africans doing the same, you're seeing Chinese doing the same, everywhere it is the same. So there is no monopoly that the West has got on IQ or on brains or on rationality or on logic. However much they'd like to position themselves as progressive, modern, intellectuals, technologically advanced, and the rest of the world is backward, primitive, stagnant, and these superstitious, these labels don't hold. So we have to be very careful when we see the world in this sense. Long answer, Adityaji, but it is necessary to give the historical depth to that question when we talk about American exceptionalism or when we talk about the white man's burden or the white man's taking cognizance of the phenomena in the world before they'll admit it. So it's bigotry. The bottom line is bigotry. Bottom line is it derives from their bigoted frameworks of Old Testament and other places.
Very good answer. Actually, it needed a long answer, so it did a justification to that question also. The one of the things which really challenge us, that the Indian Americans who toe the Western line are given prominence, and that's how they are in the best positions, because they are trying to hide their cultural or the thought process. They see, once you're born in India or follow a Vedic culture, born in USA, you cannot avoid it. Like, you cannot internally question, but you keep quiet, because there is no way you can express. The moment you express, you're kicked out. So the West is reaping the wealth because of the Indian entrepreneurship, which is driven by the Vedic thought process, but they are not giving them the right to express themselves fully. And probably that's why the Indian Americans are not able to contribute to the American politics or the American policy making, because we are not there. Policy makers are all believers, okay? And believer means blind believers, not the intelligent believers or the pratyaksha pramana, who are working on the facts. So even though Indian Americans may claim to be a very successful community, but if you look at from the Dharmic point of view, they are not successful because they are not allowed to contribute to the American society. They're allowed to communicate only to their culture and their people. And when the American politicians come to Indian Americans for vote, actually they're not looking at the vote, they're looking at the money. It's like, we made you rich, now you help us. is a different mindset
Mhm.
completely. You and I are fully aware because we study their cultures. You will not find and like people like you and me on Fox News, CNN, OANN, any mainstream channel. Our articles cannot be published in, and I'm saying telling it publicly, even the Google and YouTube don't promote us. They
Right.
promote their own thought process, which is
Mhm.
so shallow. Like when I see the discussions, it looks like two kindergartens of India talking about policy making. So how do you perceive this bias, which is in by law everyone is equal, but yes, there is a scholarly consensus, there is academic consensus, there is a policy consensus. Indian Americans are out of it. So are the Indian Americans stupid and foolish, or the rest of the believers are? What is your point?
Good question again. So again, loaded, very, very loaded. So the great Indian American intellectual Rajiv Malhotra, he had an unkind word for these people, the sepoys. He called them sepoys, and they said that sepoys is the word for sipahi, which is a soldier in India, and who were paid by the British to do unimaginable atrocities on their own citizens, literally on Indian citizens. So it has come to be known in a derogatory sense, the sepoy. So he refers to this phenomenon as that of sepoys. Now, I tend to take a nuanced view of this. So when I look at what the British did in India, they destroyed the ecosystem that existed, that had a closed economy. Imagine for a minute, if you will, that you have an ecosystem where you don't matter. You're an outsider who's coming, you're welcome to partake of our fruits, but you really don't matter to the discourse at all. If that was the way that ecosystem was, everybody has employment, everybody's got things to contribute, and it's a nice closed economy. Unfortunately, what we see is when the British came, they destroyed that ecosystem. If you destroy the ecosystem, the question is, how are people going to survive? And people are going to survive by taking jobs that there is. And the Kshatriyas and the others who are out of a job at that point, the only job they could get was as military men and such things for the British. They had a choice. They had a choice that they could not do some of the things the British wanted by fighting their own countrymen, for example. And perhaps that notion was not well developed enough in India of that time when one region was fighting another region. And so perhaps that was not a possible route for them to reason, rationalize, and do the right thing. So we see the phenomenon of sepoys. But what I wanted to point out was there was no other economic venue open to these people other than working in the framework created by the British. The British here now are a stand in for the Western frameworks over here. So now we transplant it to today's times. In today's times, it appears to be very, very similar, where the West, in order to try to control some aspect of Asian thinking, wants a native informant. The native informant is the sepoy in today's sense, who chooses to go and get educated in the Western darshana or their ways of looking at the world, which is white man's burden and these kind of things, and regurgitate that information to the native country itself. This native informant takes this from the West and regurgitates it. He's very valuable for the West. He's very valuable because he brings in knowledge of the native cultures, which the West can digest, put it in the framework that they want, put the spins that they want on that in service of the Judeo Christian framework, and then regurgitate that to the native people. And because he's got the credentialing of Harvard or Yale or Stanford or these Ivy League universities, he's elevated over here. So the native informant, for this privilege of being hosted by these powerful Western voices, he is a willing pawn over here where he has sold out his own culture. So we're seeing the same phenomenon of sepoys because there's no room for the sepoy to have maneuvered over here except to fit into the economic framework the British offered. The same thing over here. The sepoy in today's intellectual framework tries to fit into this framework. But you have your freedoms, and you've got to realize that. You have your freedoms. The sepoy had the freedom not to fire on fellow Indians, and that expressed itself several times in the Vellore Mutiny, we see that in southern India, the soldiers revolted against the British because they refused to let them to wear the caste marks, the chandanam, the tuft, and other things. Because of that, they revolted and killed the British officers. We saw that again in 1857 when a whole lot of Indian soldiers went against the British and killed a whole lot of them. So we see that such things have happened when people allow their conscience to rule and such things. Similarly, in the West also, we see a few people here and there who are challenging the frameworks under which they are expected to operate and say, no, I don't think this is right. And like you correctly said, these voices are promptly squashed by the ecosystem. Your voices are not amplified, your voices are not heard, and so on. Let me give a couple of analogies. In the colonial times, we used to see that every year or so there's a darbar where the king might come from Britain, he might come to India, or the queen might come to India, and maybe in Delhi or somewhere else they meet, and all the Maharajas will congregate over there. And the amount of respect the crown accorded to a Maharaja was controlled by how many guns salute that Maharaja would get. For example, if a big Maharaja came, he might get a 7-gun salute or a 21-gun salute, or somebody else might get a 1-gun salute or 2-gun salute. So the prestige was manufactured by the British with this meaningless symbolism of gunfire, and that was made into a much sought after prestige entity by the Maharajas. Similarly, we see the British, how they did things in southern India. I have several accounts where the British, when they have a feast, let's say in the fishermen communities and so on, they'll choose to privilege one person to sit next to them, another person at some other table, and so on. So sitting closer and closer to the white man was seen as a position of prestige and power. So they sold these ideologies. In today's world, how is this being made? This has been done by, for example, these prestigious positions of professorships in some of these universities or endowed chairs in Ivy League universities. That is prestige. Or awarding of a certain prize, Pulitzer, Nobel, all these things motivated by certain ideologies. That is another form of prestige. Or even more contemporary, if you are on Twitter and places like that, to get the coveted blue tick symbol. That itself is now a coveted thing. And that's because the West manufacture that meaningless symbol which you hanker after because you believe that is a validation that you need. So it requires the people who look for these meaningless expressions to go beyond that, and that calls for evolution. That calls for an evolution of the mind and the brain to beyond where they have tied themselves. If your net worth and your self-esteem is governed by which university you graduated from, or what car you drive, a BMW, an Audi, or anything else. That's what controls a net self-esteem. Or how big is your bungalow, and things of that nature. Well, you're stuck in these meaningless symbolisms. It makes sense to you. It gives you happiness, well and good. But if that is the only projection of your symbolism, then there are people who can control that. They can people who can control the symbolism that you hanker after, and before you know it, you are serving their interests and needs. And that is what we see repeatedly. But if you go beyond all of these things, then they have lost the control. They don't have that control. Then you can freely profess what you think. And I like to think of myself in that framework where I have no compunctions coming here and talking about the Vedic civilization and what it was, and calling out the historiography and what the West has done to control our minds and so on. So I freely profess that with no fear or any such thing, because I refuse to allow these chains to be put on me. And I wish that more and more people would do that. But you're right, Aditya ji, our voices are squashed by the powers that be, whether it's Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. I see that all the time. The follower count keeps dropping. And my posts, sometimes they don't even get 3 or 4 impressions on Twitter. I need to repeatedly put it on retweet before you get a few hundred views and these kind of things. So it's very, very unfortunate. That is where we are today. But more Indians realize this and build our ecosystem, the better for us.
Now, Indian Americans, they are very successful in jobs. I won't say anything else, just jobs. Okay, just over broke, JOB. Now, and we very much pride ourselves. But if you look at the Indian Americans promoting their own people, so much brain power, but no media has come out yet. Because and many religious successful organizations were infiltrated purposefully to destroy them from within. We have classical cases of Osho, classical cases of ISKCON, classical cases of many other groups which were actively involved in the American society were destroyed internally, and so that the belief culture and dogmatic culture remains in the top. Now, so what do you think is the problem with the Indian American communities? Like if you look at a Jewish community, we have such great authors in this country. We have Nilesh Oak, we have yourself, we have so many other. I just go out of the count of the names. None of them are promoted. None of them. And unfortunately, they will depend on India. Obviously, India is the mother country, so where they have to involve to Indian. In the case of American authors, again they have to involve their fatherly country. I say father because they have to involve Hungary or British. British has a huge influence on this country. So this country is already a colonial occupation, and still it's going on. It's nothing has ended yet. Spanish versus British thought are already colliding. So my question to you is: every community promotes their thought leaders, except the Indian American community. You know, Indian American community, every individual who tries to do something bigger, they are stopped by their own fellow people and no promotion. A very ordinary author in a Jewish community with a very small population, smaller than Indians, gets promoted on a national level through the channels,
Right, right.
but doesn't have an Indian American community. So where is the Indian American community going wrong?
So, so the answer to this question must again look at the enforced ignorance of our people. I call it deliberately enforced ignorance of the Indian American and the Indian people, just that not only the diaspora, the Indians themselves, because of the frameworks I've talked on your channel earlier. To refresh the mind, there are 5 frameworks that have controlled our identity and our history. That is the colonial, the missionary, the Eurocentric, the academia, socialist academia, and the Marxist. These 5 frameworks have controlled the expression of and the writing of the history of India, the narratives on the history of India, the way of looking at the Indian civilization. Everything has towed a common line, and that common line has been to show Indians as backward, primitive, stagnant. I keep saying this, but that's how it has been presented. Any response you have to the Indian civilization, if somebody says, for example, Rama, Krishna, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? If you see that the reaction has been negative, if you're a thinking person, you would try to ask, why did I have this visceral knee-jerk reaction to this whole thing? Why do I look at it this way? And then you might realize that that is because that has been programmed into you. Your mind has been programmed. So you have a Pavlovian response. You have a Pavlovian response the minute you hear some trigger words. When the trigger words are put, like Alexa, you say, for the Alexa device, the minute somebody puts some trigger words, your mind immediately responds and says, I don't believe this is all nonsense and all the superstition. And guess where that came from? That rejection of your culture, of your history, of your heritage has been programmed into you by these 5 frameworks that I talked about. In the writing of history of India, what we learn for the last 100 years, what we have been internalized and pushed into us. This is what I call enforced ignorance. So we are conditioned to look at our own past as one of primitiveness. That is why the average Indian has got no clue, not a single clue of any rishis of the past. I ask the question, can anybody say even the name of 3 or 4 rishis? Many people can't. Many people can't. But their intellectual works survive till the present day. The works, the bhashyas that they wrote, the siddhantas that they've written, the mathematics, astronomy, the philosophy, these works survive across many thousands and thousands of years. But we are ignorant of them. Why? In any other civilization, these people will be celebrated as the people who brought the civilization up and so on. But in India, we curiously, although we have so much to celebrate, We don't even talk about them. Why is that? That is a question that the thinking Indian must ask. And unfortunately, many of us don't think. The average person today is more engrossed in, sucking on the teats of capitalism, to put it crudely. That is where we are. We are hankering after how many lakhs is my pay packet every month? What can I get a bigger pay if I jump from this company to that company? And if I go here, I can afford to buy a luxury apartment or maybe a bungalow somewhere and those kinds of things, or buy a much more expensive car or go to Europe on a vacation. This is for the Indian upward corporate wannabe. And on the other side, the Indian American, it is very, very similar. Whether you are somebody who's fresh off the boat or somebody who's been here for some time, it is exactly the same kind of thinking that propels you. You have put everything on the back burner in pursuit of mindless capitalism. That is where you are. So I'm seeing the Indian American over here with zero pride in their heritage, civilization, history because of the enforced ignorance that has been put on them. And the minute you talk to them about any of the Indian history, heritage, identity, the response is Pavlovian. It's Pavlovian because that is how they've been programmed to react. So many high impact Indian Americans in the US today, they could make change happen in a very big way if they were evolved sufficiently to understand the shackles put on their minds and they're able to break them and throw them and go to where reality is. Unfortunately, that does not happen. To give you an anecdote, Aditya ji, I have been trying so hard to speak in Boston for the last 3-4 months, 3-4 weeks. I've been requesting people that I meet everywhere. I'm going to Boston on a short trip, and I thought I'll give a talk to the public on Indian history. I approached so many leaders. Not one person feels that it is important for our civilization to talk about ourselves, to talk about who we are from an authentic framework. That urgency is not there. That need to talk is not there. So unlike the Jewish community, so unlike several other communities, whether the Christians, the Muslims, or the Japanese, or the Germans, Europeans, whoever, every one of these civilizations takes pride in their civilization because they don't have enforced ignorance. They don't have difference anxiety to talk about themselves. But here we are, where even the so called leaders, including the leaders of the Hindu community, are unable to provide a platform for somebody who's willing to come and talk on that platform, and there is no financial expenditure on their part. This is the sorry state in which we are. The Jewish community values its heritage because it is greatly valued after the Holocaust and other such things. And there are enormous numbers of successful entrepreneurs all over the world, Jewish entrepreneurs, who value their civilization, who have created the foundations, corpus funds, and they support every aspect of the Jewish expression. And we find that. Same thing goes for many other civilizations. Where are the Hindu entrepreneurs? Where are the Hindu supporters? Where are they? They're not there because the Indian government does not share this notion of our identity because they too have been deracinated. And so also all these people that I talked about. So Aditya ji, I share the frustration that you have that many of our high impact Indian Americans and medium impact Indian Americans and low impact Indian Americans are deracinated. We are deracinated and unable to see the importance of identity and culture. They will realize it at some point in their career that it is not only money, there is something else that matters. Maybe when their kids grow up or somewhere along the line, they will find identity matters. It will be too late. It will be too late for them. Unfortunately, we are condemned because of the karma phala that they are getting to repeatedly go through this cycle. Although there are people saying it's important, you need to do this, they don't have unfortunately, the ability to make these things happen.
You know, successful American businesses, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, they are not seculars. They promote Christianity.
Right.
They promote Christianity.
Right.
When was the last time you saw, and they get involved in smallest of the small projects? Not a single Indian American supports. Indian American will pay $10,000 to bring someone from India to here. And the reverse goes, the Indians call the Indian American authors to promote their books in India.
Right.
But I've not seen an Indian American promoting like people like you from spending the money to fund them to support their life and support their they can easily do that. Most of them can do that. No, see, there is a
Right.
difference between the Jewish community and Indian community. Jewish community, like I give an example, I was part of the Chamber of Commerce in New York, so I
Mhm.
know I worked with the CEOs in Jewish community, big
Mhm.
CEOs, and
Mhm.
the one thing is the top of the mind. The part of their business revenues must go in promoting the Jewish interests.
Right.
Same goes with the Islamic. Uh,
Right. The zakat that they have, the tithing that the Christians have. Yes, absolutely right.
Not there in Hindu community. Hindu community temples don't even allow you to speak anything about
Yes.
elections.
Yes.
And
Yes.
most of the
Yes.
Hindu temple communities, Hindu temples, don't allow you to give a talk or
That's my
discuss.
experience, Aditya Ji. That's
There
my
is no
experience here in Houston, where there are, I'm not going to name the temples, there are temples that refuse to call me to speak. So there you
they
are.
won't do that. They won't do that because they're the same deracinated right word you used actually.
Right.
Because
Right.
they are programmed to think that like one of the leaders of Hindu community who personally talks to me all the time. And they talk to me because I was a pujari in ISKCON and everything else. So they talk to me in all those angles. And they tell me that they are very much concerned about Hindu plight. I said, then open your temples and help people talk, involve them. They
Right.
don't do that because there is no culture of Bhagavatam. There is no culture of Gita.
Mhm.
Whereas if you look at our Shastra, look at any Shastra, all the sadhus are sitting, the state
Mhm.
is funding, state is giving all the facilities, and there's a
Right.
discussion happening. Bhagavad
Right.
Puran is all about Nami Sharanya,
Right.
Shukdev, Sudha Goswami, Shukdev Goswami discussing.
Right.
Mahabharata is all about discussion. Uh,
Right.
Vaisham Payan speaking Mahabharata to Janmajay. So
Right.
we all want to be so-called WhatsApp Hindu activists, but we do not
Mhm.
want to actually do some karma for that.
Right.
You know,
Right.
isn't that
Right.
hypocrisy?
I think so. I think so. There's enormous hypocrisy over here, and there's also enormous deracination, ignorance, everything. Toxic mix of the negativisms. Tamasic. We are highly tamasic people over here, and but there are a few bright spots in Indian Americans here and there. So clearly, they are not included in what I said. But there are a great majority are unfortunately tamasic.
Thank you so much, Raj Vedam ji, and thank you for all the viewers who are watching it live. And I was very critical against Indian Americans, but that's what I wanted to do this time. That's it was Convictions of Raj Vedam, but the title will be Indian Americans Wake Up.
Thank you. Thank you for calling me,
Namaste.
Aditya Ji.